Um, Thinking about a couple passages of Scripture that I have been thinking upon lately and have been really encouraged by and excited about. We read one of them earlier, where Jesus stood up in the temple, reading from the scroll of Isaiah, and he said, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, for he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives, recovery of sight to the blind, to set free those who are oppressed, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." That's the purpose of Jesus. That's good. Jesus invites us in Matthew 11, 28 to 30. Jesus gives an invitation to people saying, "Come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and I am humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." For those of us who experience this rest that Jesus gives, it is good news. But there's a sad reality. There are billions of people in this world that have not experienced this, not only because they have not made a choice to follow Jesus and accept this rest from him, but they've never heard. And how are they to know when there's no one around them to tell them? And there's various forces in the world that are causing oppression upon people and holding people in bondage and captivity from hearing the word of Jesus. Here in America, thousands, millions of people are addicted to drugs, sex, alcohol, materialism, pride. This isn't only an American thing, it's worldwide. People are held in these bondages and held captive in these ways. Jesus comes to set the captives free. There are many tribal and animistic religions around the world in which people are held in bondage to fear. They have this worldview of where they need to appease the spirits properly, lest the spirits that they don't appease correctly will send illness, will send death, will send torment on themselves or their family. They're continually living in this bondage to fear. Jesus has come that they may experience rest and be released from that bondage and captivity. There are millions, billions of Muslims around the world, 1.7 billion or so, that they are oppressed by spiritual forces and governing officials that deny them to learn of the truth of who Jesus is as God's mercy by which they can have forgiveness of their sins. And so they carry this heavy load. They are wearied and heavily burdened by trying to please God dutifully by following commands and worshiping him just the right way and such, and getting to the end of life still unsure of having rest with God. And so Jesus has come to release those who are oppressed and held captive and in bondage in various ways. He has come to set them free. He has come that we may have rest. After healing a lame beggar and teaching about Jesus as God's mercy, Peter and John were in front of the council of officials, and they declared, "There is salvation in no one else. For there is no other name under heaven given among men by which we must be saved." That's in Acts 4:12. Jesus paints a picture for us in Matthew 13 of the unsurpassing value of the kingdom of heaven. He says that the kingdom of heaven is as a treasure that's hidden in a field. And a man finds it and covers it back up again. Then in his joy, he sells all that he has that he may buy that field and he may procure that treasure. Or the kingdom of heaven is as a merchant in search of fine pearls. And when he finds one of great value, he sells all that he has so that he may get that one of great value. The kingdom of heaven is valuable. Jesus is good news. So let us take seriously Jesus' commission in Matthew 28. He says that all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the name of the Son, and the name of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey all that I have commanded you. And behold, I will be with you always to the end of the age. What a promise. Earlier, we read Psalm 67. Of God's salvation being known among all nations. That all peoples praising God. All nations being glad and singing for joy. And that the ends of the earth will fear the Lord. And Jesus commands us here to make disciples of all nations. What does this mean? To what extent of the world does this apply to be reaching all nations? What population is that looking like? What is a nation? In our terminology, sometimes we think of, so this is the picture of Nigeria, okay? So the geopolitical boundary, the country of Nigeria. But is that what Jesus is referring to when he speaks of nations, just reaching each country of the world? Today, Jesus is represented on every continent and in every country by his church, bringing transformation of societies. So have we completed the Great Commission? I would reckon no, we have not. When Jesus speaks of nations, it is not the geopolitical boundaries. He is speaking of ethne, all ethno-linguistic people groups. Here's the same region, but now here's the nations in that region, where there are many ethno-linguistic people groups held together by similar culture, language, experiences, and that's what we talk about when we are to make disciples of all nations. All these tribes, languages, tongues, all these ethnicities, many of which are in any one country in the world. There's currently 196 countries worldwide, I believe it is. There's estimates, though, that there are 17,000 nations, of which 7,000 of them, 41% of them, are considered unreached. And when we're speaking of unreached people groups, that's talking about there's no indigenous church within that people to be able to bring this good, freeing message of Jesus to their own people. And so then outside help of bringing the word of Jesus is required. As far as a statistical measurement, they go by less than 2% of evangelical Christians who are proclaiming the goodness of Jesus within their population. Of those 7,000 that are considered unreached people groups, I believe it's about 3,000 that are considered unengaged, unreached people groups, of which there is less than even 0.1% of the population of that ethnicity is evangelical Christian, following Jesus and desiring for others to know this freeing goodness of Jesus. So So then why are there so many unreached nations? There's various things, the oppression and bondage that we're talking of earlier, governments being closed to Jesus, causing oppression to their citizens. Anybody who seeks to follow the ways of Jesus or any sort of religious affiliation sometimes, they are being persecuted. Geographical, many of these unreached nations, some of them are smaller tribes and backwoods or high in the mountains, harsh climates, hard to get to. Some of them are mammoth people groups in major cities in the Middle East and whatnot. There's also many unreached because of the complacency of the church, us not taking seriously the commission that Jesus has given us. Some of that is simply because of a lack of awareness. We think, well, the church is throughout the world, so then the commission must be done. We must not have work to be done. And we're not aware of the issues of these unreached people groups that still do not have any proximate believers within them to tell them about Jesus. And so who are they going to hear the good news from? And coming from complacency of the church and lack of awareness of the church, then there gets to be a great imbalance of both workers that are working to further God's kingdom and the resources given to do so, whether it's financial or other resources. And there gets to be a great imbalance of resources going towards areas that already have churches and believers and Bibles and people, a great access to the gospel, whereas very little given to those without churches, without Bibles, without access to the gospel. And so we're going to watch a video here that is to bring some light to this imbalance. In no way is it meant to bring guilt or shame to any one of us or the church as a whole as to our role or lack of role or anything. It's just meant to bring awareness. Let's open up discussion as to the task that is remaining for us, that we have a privilege of partaking in, and give opportunity for God to continue shaping us as His children.
Jesus told us 2,000 years ago that our mission is to go and make disciples of all nations. He also promised us that only after we accomplish that task will we receive the blessing of His return. So, how are we doing accomplishing our mission? To answer that, let's classify the 7 billion people on the earth today into 3 groups. Let's start with the Christians. About 33% of the world's population would identify itself as Christian. We call this segment of the population World C. C for Christian. It's important to remember that not all of the people that fall into World C are true believers in Christ. They merely identify themselves as Christian because of nominal belief in Jesus, or because they live in a country where everyone is considered Christian, so they would do the same. Next, there's the 38% of the world that has access to the gospel but has chosen not to follow Jesus. They have Bibles in their language, churches nearby, friends or co-workers who are potentially Christians, or access to other Christian resources in their language. These people have access to the good news, but just haven't acted on it yet. This segment of the population is called World B. That leaves us with 29% of the world, just over 1 out of every 4 people on this planet who not only have never heard of Jesus, they have no chance of hearing the good news of Jesus Christ. They have no access to the gospel, no Bibles, no churches, no believers nearby, no chance to learn about Jesus. We call that 29% World A. Now on to missionaries. Only 1 out of every 1,800 Christians in World C decides to serve as a cross-cultural missionary. So, we can pull 400,000 missionaries out of that World C population. That's our total cross-cultural missionary force worldwide. Did you know that 72% of all our missionaries are going to World C? That's right. The vast majority of the missionaries being sent out are going to the people of the world that have Bibles and established churches. 25% of the missionaries are sent to World B, where there is already some access to the church and to the Bible. That leaves only 3% of the total missionary force to handle all of World A, the section of the population without any chance of hearing about Jesus. 29% of the world has no way to hear the gospel, but we're sending only a tiny portion of our Christian workers to them. What about finances? Annually, all those Christians in World C earn a total of $42 trillion. And, together, they give about $700 billion to Christian causes each year. That includes everything: Christian nonprofits, churches, youth programs, missions, etc. Can you do the math? Less than 2% of Christian income is being given to Christ's causes. Out of that $700 billion given to all Christian causes, only $45 billion is given to missions specifically. That's a little over 6%. In fact, there is more money reported embezzled from the church each year than is given to missions. Remember those 400,000 missionaries? We have $45 billion to support them and their cross-cultural work, but how exactly is it allocated? Well, $39 billion goes to World C every year. Yep, 87% of that missions money is being spent in areas of the world that have Bibles and churches available. 5.4 billion, or 12%, goes to World B each year, those that have access to the gospel message but have rejected it. That leaves only $450 million, or 1% of all missions money going to World A, the least reached people of the world. To put that into perspective, annually Americans spend more money on Halloween costumes for their pets than gets sent to World A. To summarize, only 3% of our missionary force, armed with only 1% of missions giving, is going out to reach the 2 billion people who don't have access to the gospel. 2 billion people are still waiting for the good news of Jesus Christ. So here's a question for you. What are you going to do to change that?
That's a great question. What are we going to do to change that? As we consider the majority of these unreached people groups, where are they located? This map, so this map of the world, the red dots are, so this is from joshuaproject.net, and the red dots are progress scale of 1, as in the unreached peoples of the world. And so as you can be seen, the majority of them are in the area called the 1040 window. So that's between 10 and 40 degrees latitude north of the equator. So covering across the North Africa, Middle East, Southeast Asia and such. And so that's where the majority of the population lives. 2/3 of the world's population is in that area of the world. And then the rest are scattered elsewhere. About 90% of those in the 1040 window are unevangelized. They have not heard of this good news of Jesus, how he can free them and give freedom from oppression and bondage and captivity of all sorts, and have rest. And so, while we can go and send people into the 1040 window and reach the people there, another thing that God is doing that is very exciting, that allows all of us to be even more involved in God's work, is he is bringing people from the unreached nations in the 1040 window here, throughout the States, here to KU in Lawrence. I have various friends that are either living or studying here at KU, as from Saudi Arabia, from other countries in the Middle East, from China, from all sorts of different countries, for various African countries. And it is exciting, the opportunities that they have while they are here to encounter us as people of God, as people to share Christ, and they have opportunities to encounter Jesus. So how can we be a part of what God is doing here in Lawrence? Pray. Fast and pray. One of the things that I've been trying to do a lot more over the past year is praying much more for laborers, praying much more for the harvest. And I would encourage you, set your phone or watch alarms to either 10:02 or 9:38. AM or PM doesn't matter to me. But both of those, Luke 10:02 and Matthew 9:38, are the two passages where Jesus is saying, the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore, pray to the Lord of the harvest to thrust out laborers into his harvest field. And I have found for myself, as I have had my alarm set to that over this last year, and each day it goes off at 9:38, it helps me to remember, yes, pray for them. Do I always? No, sometimes I'm busy doing other things in a conversation. No, I don't always stop and pray. But it is something that I've been growing much more in, praying for the laborers. And God moves in my heart to be a laborer as well. As I pray for those that are unreached, that God acts among them. Or there's a screenshot there of the from Joshua Project, the Unreached of the Day app. That is an app you can put on your phone. When you open it up each day, it's a different unreached people group with some information about them, a map of where they are, a summary of who they are, that we can be praying for them and joining others in praying. Or another prayer resource, the map board out in the hallway. That's something that Mary's been periodically updating with various issues going around the world, what God is doing around the world. It's a great prayer fodder on there. I'd encourage you to check it out. And currently it has 6 different ways in which we can be a part of God's work in his kingdom, of going, of sending, of praying, learning more and being more informed, of mobilizing others, of welcoming internationals. Gather together with others in the community and within the church body to pray. And not only praying for the health and happenings of FCC, yes, those are important, but also to be looking beyond us and praying for the unreached, praying for the lost and helpless as sheep without a shepherd. You can learn more of God's heart for the nations and how to be involved. The Perspectives course, perspectives.org, great course. Mary and I have been through it 6 times now, I think, or 5, 6. The next course offering here in Lawrence is planned for next year, January through May. It'll be Sunday evenings, or Sunday afternoon evenings again this year. And so I encourage you to consider being a part of that. Allow your mind to be exploded of what God is doing around the world and how we can be a part of that. Welcoming internationals is another great way to be involved. A couple ministries here in Lawrence, as far as focusing on international students, are Bridges International and International Friends. We've been a part of International Friends while we've been in Lawrence. Danny and Judy Chadwick, they've been a part of International Friends, having conversation partners with many Chinese students over the years. And so if you want more information on those, talk to us. Feel free.